So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Cyberpunk, so let's start the series. Are we clear? As Main's crew celebrated the completion of yet another work, the music inside Turbos was loud and permeating the atmosphere. However, the atmosphere had deteriorated significantly after their new rookie's first one. It wasn't the night air that sent shivers down the crew's spines. Instead, it was the ongoing conflict between their boss and the person who fixed the work they were allegedly successful at. But there was a small problem. The information they had stolen, or rather, the vehicle that was transporting it, had turned out to be completely worthless. So much so that the middle guy would himself appear. Main's reply, with a menacing edge, was, "Crystal." But he understood there was little he could do. As he took a step back toward his car, Faraday allowed a triumphant grin to appear on his face. "Good. For now, we'll wait until he lowers his guard again. I'll be in touch," the man said, then turned around and departed. With a tongue click, Main said, see ya." After a little uneasy stillness, the music started to fill the air once more. Main paused for a moment before turning around to hear footsteps coming toward him. After staring at him for a while, the inexperienced worker scratched the back of his head and asked, "So who was that?" Sighing, the big guy said, "Faraday. Supposedly the best fixer of this area. That's at least the reputation." David uttered the words. "Thought you were the big boss making all the calls around the crew," while still keeping his hands inside his jacket. The individual turned to face him. "Nah, I'm the one who gets shit done. And he is the one holding all the eddies. His gigs buys us dinner, and pays for our rent, making it all go full circle. Without him and the money, you ain't nothing in this business." The young man's face was grim as he nodded. He had always been curious about how everything operated, but he was never given the chance to question, so he decided not to. He gave another nod, then walked away from Maine and toward his chair. He didn't turn around until he sat down. "Seems like there is more." Maine's eyebrows shot up. Taking up his drink and taking a sip, the young guy shrugged and said, "The look on your face reminds me of my mom, when she had something to say but didn't know how to word it. Or rather, she didn't want me to know, so I wouldn't worry. As I said before, everybody gets their fair share. The only way I operate, but as of right now, we've spent up what we had." The big man grunted a little as he slumped against the car's bumper once more. Faraday said he'll be in touch, but preparations may cost more than we'll earn. Need to put some eddies in store so we're ready. "No other jobs available?" asked David as he scratched the back of his head. Humming, Maine said, "There is one. It's sketchy though." "Sketchy how?" asked David. "I can't tell you much about it, but the location is in the north, and the pay is good," the man said, shaking his head. With a raised eyebrow, the rookie asked, "No details from Faraday?" Maine said, "Not coming from Faraday. Right away." Leaning forward in his chair, the boy with the brown hair said, "Thought he was the fixer in this area." Maine tightened his fists. "I got an old adversary. I know what I said, and this ain't routine, but no fixer. Personal job, and he got the eddies, I have it confirmed." "Then what's the big deal? Let's go get the job done, get the scratch, and make preparations for whatever Faraday got going next," David offered. "While we got a good crew running with us, this is top of the shelf. As in, fixers from Afterlife's normal type of business deals." Maine got up from his position and took a moment to think about how to phrase the job's problem. The job itself is simple: search and recover. My guy got a crate stolen. The problem is that it's currently kept in a Militech facility out in the Badlands. Knowing what corpos could accomplish if they truly set their minds to it, David swallowed at that. It would be difficult to run around corners with them in terms of facilities and resources. So we lack manpower, he said, even while wearing a Sandevistan. Maine clarified. We got numbers, but not a guy with that kind of experience. After a brief pause, a voice that sounded almost robotic came from their left. I might know someone. A young woman with short blonde hair caught Maine and David's attention as they turned their heads in that direction. The static voice appeared to be caused by wearing a face mask and having yellow eyes. Her features were mostly hidden by her long crimson jacket. Kiwi? Maine grunted. The woman said, I got a contact. Used to run a few gigs a while back. He is efficient, experienced, and good at running. How good? Raised David's eyebrows. The woman remarked, Good enough for what we need, and stepped closer to the two. Maine looked her and scowled a little before saying, Consider me surprised. Said Kiwi, raising a brow. The man grinned and said, Didn't take you for the type to have friends. She asked, What is that supposed to mean? He sighed. Always on the hunt for more eddies, first when the crew is called. No talk of personal life, just doesn't match. She crossed her arms and squinted, saying, He is what we need. He is not cheap, but we get results. So who is the chum? Kiwi lit a cigarette and said, His name is Naruto, used to be on a squad by accident. Rest of the past is irrelevant. The smoke rose into the air. The blonde gonk? Maine asked, crossing his arms across his chest. She grumbled. If you by gonk mean a person that could decorate the road with your face, then yes, that's the one. David groaned as the two talked back and forth. I feel like I'm missing something here. Who is this guy anyway? Sounds like hot air if you asked me. I thought runners were best in crews, but solo runners sound like trouble. After a little pause, Kiwi said, There is a reason Maine was so hung up on the Sandevistan. Before he could ask, Maine had already continued. Through stories at celebrations like these, Kiwi did mention him once before. Didn't know he was the guy in question before now, though. Never met the guy, but the stories seem unbelievable. Mostly organic, except one piece of chrome, Sandevistan. So he is the reason you wanted the chrome so bad? David asked as his eyes widened in surprise. The man sighed and said, Stories seemed like hot air, but the chrome is military. Though even with slowed down time for whoever presses the funny button on the tech, the stories always seemed exaggerated. Yet you always claim they aren't. It's no ordinary Sandevistan. Military tech or not, some fixers know how to temper with the tech. Kiwi laughed quickly, almost mockingly, and said, Can't say what was done, so let's leave it at that. David questioned, So, overclocking of some kind? Maine glanced to Kiwi and shrugged, letting out a weary sigh before saying, Give the chum a call, learn his schedule. And his cut. I'll send you the deets on the job, and we'll take it from there. A lone blonde man jogged through the dark alleys of Night City in another nook. Apart from the annoying ranting of a group of tiger claws huddled inside a local restaurant, the only sounds in the vicinity were the distant sounds of automobile engines on the highway. Wearing a black sleeveless shirt, a white jacket with the front open, and a basic pair of blue trousers, he stretched a little. He was leaning his side against the structure with a rucksack slung over his shoulder. As his tech zoomed in on one of the guys by the bar, his face buried in an ashtray, with over a dozen empty bottles of alcohol surrounding his head. His eyes flared a little. "Got to be kidding me." The blonde complained a little as he extracted a fragment from his jacket pocket and inserted it. In his peripheral vision, a wall of letters appeared, and he hummed to himself. "Address checks out, though." As he reviewed the specifics, the blonde rubbed the back of his head. Tiger Claw's operation, recovery in retaliation, and a stolen personal item from a man's vehicle. Easy Eddie's simple job, but he didn't like how carefree they were. It was awful to have the same label as them. Typically, he enjoyed being Japanese, but these clowns gave the impression that he was a circus performer. After pushing off the wall, the blonde proceeded down the street and into the alleyway next to the building a few minutes later. He pushed open a little door that was set into the brickwork there. He entered the dimly lighted chamber with a click, illuminated only by a solitary light bulb suspended from the ceiling. His eyes adjusted after a moment. The blonde found himself in a storage space, pressed his bag against the wall, and opened it by pulling the zipper. He reached inside, grabbed 2 EMP grenades, and made his way to the door that led to the establishment's backroom. The location that he had previously verified was a Tiger Claw's operating base, with the establishment acting as a front. The blonde squatted in front of the door, his eyes flashing once more as he twisted the explosives around in his grip. He pulled the pins, and the door started to slide open with a click of the lock. He spun around on his feet, pressed his back against the wall, and rolled the EMP grenades over the floor and into the back room. He triggered his own cyberware in response to the bomb and the Tiger Claw's curses after their chrome was briefly fried by the EMP blasts. He pushed off the wall and entered the room as he heard them stumbling around and their words becoming muted and then suddenly coming to a complete stop. He gazed about, his eyes adjusting to the greater light. They all appeared to be motionless, but if you looked closely enough, you could see that they were all still moving slightly. Little by little. Even though they appeared to have stopped, they hadn't. Simply put, he was traveling so fast that it seemed to him that the planet had ceased to rotate and the world had frozen. Dusting his hands, he retrieved his backpack from the tiny storage area. He moved with ease through the icy mass of irate Tiger Claws until he reached a section of shelves. He searched the area while humming to himself before locating the item he sought. He nodded to himself after double-checking the client's photograph, tucked the item into his rucksack, and swung it over his shoulder once more. As he walked past them, he rubbed his chin for a moment before reaching into his rucksack and grabbing an incendiary grenade, thinking aloud. "Oh, right, the retribution part." He shrugged, rubbed his chin, and took one of the Tiger Claws by the collar, pulling him forward. Snatched the incendiary grenade from his belt and kicked the man in the back. As he started to feel the chrome's effect on his spine, he let out a slow laugh and decided it was time to Delta. He ran through the door, back out into the alleyway, and across the street, jogging back the way he had come. As he stared through the business from across the street, his gaze fixed on the lone Tiger Claw staggering face first into the room through the window, time almost miraculously restored to normal pace. As he raised a hand to cover his face and mentally counted down, the man suddenly burst into a ball of flames. The fire started to spread quickly, and the pressure caused the glass to burst. Gazing at the skyscraper engulfed in flames, he wondered himself. Too much?" He snorted and waved his hand in the air, saying, "Nah." The blonde started to leave the area and head back to one of the main highways, dusting off his shoulder. He promptly informed his customer that the task was completed and that he had placed the item at the prearranged drop-off location. He waited at the street corner after turning the corner and calling his car to him. His attention briefly lingered on the smoke pillar rising from the base of the tiger claws before shifting back toward the road. As he grinned at the sight of his ride's headlights approaching right next to him, he heard an engine. Contemporary technology's marvels. Before starting to drive away, he opened the trunk, put his backpack inside, closed it, and stepped up to sit in the driver's seat. He simply leaned back and grinned to himself when GPS coordinates indicated the drop-off. I'm pleased with another job well done. However, it might be somewhat dull if he were to be honest. A fixer was needed for many more enjoyable jobs. However, he told his former partner that he didn't want to be another merc who kisses people. Although he made the decision long ago that he was ready to live with them, it appears that choosing to be his own boss had some repercussions. Right now, he was beginning to change his mind. And he noticed his alleged ex-partner's incoming call as if it were a sign. At that, the blonde furrowed his brow. As he parked the car next to the drop-off, he scratched the back of his head and responded. A very familiar blonde woman appeared when the feed opened up in his vision. After a brief pause, he declared, "It's been a minute, how've you been? Kiwi? When did Naruto Uzumaki start a conversation with such formalities?" "Something wrong with asking if you're okay?" asked Naruto, raising an eyebrow as he rolled down his window to obtain some fresh air. "Assume not." The brunette laughed. "Good to hear from you, it's been a minute. How's the crew life treating ya?" "I'm hoping to hear that I'm unhappy and that I want to return to be your companion." "Would that be so bad?" Naruto asked, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel after a minute of silence. "Coming back, or do you want me to return?" With a little smile, he replied plainly, "The latter." "Well, I suppose it's good to be missed." "So what's up?" "We haven't met up like we used to for a while. So I suppose this is not just a I missed you type of deal, right?" Naruto said, rolling his eyes at the edge of her tone. There was silence once again before she answered. "Crew needs help, and you're the right person. You know I don't play well with fixers." Naruto sighed as he took his hand off the driving wheel and scratched the back of his head. "No fixer. Since when?" he asked, seeming perplexed this time. "Since now." She shrugged at him. Main received the contact information, but no fixer. "An old foe, allegedly," Naruto said. "That doesn't sound sketchy at all," with a tinge of irony. "Yeah, it does," said Kiwi with a little laugh. "But I can attest to it, you know me." With a dry snort, Naruto said, "Doesn't mean much if the supposed job is to drop a bomb at Arasaka. Are you still attempting to imitate Silverhand?" "What's that supposed to mean?" he said, raising a brow. She didn't say anything, she simply looked at him. With a gentle sigh, Naruto said, "Okay, I'll be there. Crew wants to get a look at you first. We'll swing by your place, and give you the home field advantage if that's any comfort," said Kiwi, nodding her head in agreement. "Sounds good to me. The address is the same as usual. I'll email you in advance," she said, nodding her head once more before hanging up, leaving Naruto alone once more as the visual feed vanished. The blonde shook his head, let out a deep breath, and got out of the car. Without even looking inside the package, he moved to the trunk and got the item the client had asked for. He simply left it there and got back into his car because he didn't really care. He waited a minute before sending the client a brief visual. Soon after, he was able to drive away after seeing the eddies wired to his account. Since he was no longer in charge of the gift, he could concentrate on whatever Kiwi had gotten herself into that would need his assistance, of all people. Naruto reached a small, one-story home a few hours later. It was not particularly noteworthy, but its proximity to the city's edge suggested that it would be a suitable location for someone in his line of work. Since the area wasn't particularly busy, he wouldn't attract too much unwanted attention. However, he assumed there wouldn't be any problems as long as the client was aware that he was suitable for it. The blonde exited his vehicle and took the backpack from the trunk as he pulled up in front of the house. He quickly unlocked his house after slipping it over his shoulder and making his way to the door. Before moving deeper into the house, he kicked off his shoes in the first corridor. He walked past the little living area and headed for his bedroom, letting out a gentle yawn. His eyes flared and he turned left instead of going into the aforementioned chamber. The door slid open, showing what looked like an operating room after the lock was decrypted. There was a chair, a computer connected to the network, and numerous types of weaponry hanging on the walls. He stretched, took off his bag, and placed it next to the astonishing array of weapons. For a minute or two, he strolled about, collecting everything he had used during the day so he could replenish the backpack with anything he might need. Given the cost of those 2 EMP grenades and 1 incendiary, he should still be largely optimistic about the compensation for the work he had just finished. Additionally, he might be able to negotiate a slight discount because he had some leverage with a few local gun dealers. There were advantages to being a lone runner avoiding fixers, but there were also risks. For example, if a client happens to be a gun merchant, they can offer good discounts on firearms and other services. Naruto sat down in his chair and scooted up beneath the desk after zipping up the backpack and placing it in a metal closet in the corner in case the stuff decided to blow up. Using the connection he wore around his wrist, he connected to his computer and unlocked all security features. He wasn't smart enough to do this himself, but a few months ago, he had a lucky run-in with a netrunner that helped him add some security. They had been friendly up to this point, but he hoped she wouldn't alter her mind someday and make everything boil over in his face. When he pressed a key on his keyboard, a new window opened and the screen came on. He was gazing at a well-known face a moment later. Main, the man, came into view. Naruto rubbed his chin and drummed his fingers against his desk for a few seconds. He might be considered overly protective, but he and Kiwi were close in multiple respects. He therefore made the decision to look up their past and monitor them once she joined his crew. He made everyone labor, but he gave everyone a fair portion of the prize. So far, he seems good enough. However, the amount of chrome the man was wearing worried him a little. A portion of it appeared to be rather a lot. He was unable to determine whether his arms were constructed using a mission launcher or whether they were combined in some way with the notorious gorilla arms. In any case, the man's chrome was excessive. Given how many blockers he would take every day, it was clear that this man was at risk for cyberpsychosis. He had occasionally scouted from a distance, but he would not tell Kiwi. Just a couple of times, to be certain. It's safe to say that he respected the man, but he needed to either respect the boundaries and be less reliant on them, or tone down the glitz. Unless he intended to go crazy somewhere in the process. That's why he was a little apprehensive about the position. While he didn't want to be close to a ticking time bomb, he also wouldn't leave Kiwi alone with it. He picked up a photo of their newest recruit while chewing on the inside of his cheek. A younger man, not considerably younger than himself, but nevertheless youthful for this industry. The chrome he received, though, was the intriguing aspect. Unexpectedly, the only piece of technology he possessed was a Sandevistan. Given the cost, purchasing military-grade chrome was much more difficult. He was curious as to how a man like him was able to obtain such goods, which is typically reserved for elite rippers. Well, he'll probably get an opportunity to inquire soon enough. As he shut off the computer and disconnected his connection, he let out another yawn. Before he got up and headed for his bedroom, the wire was reinserted into his wrist. He fell into the bed after dropping his jacket on the dresser. After kicking off his jeans and throwing his shirt somewhere in the room, the blonde would collapse onto his back and tangle his fingers behind his head while he turned around and gazed up at the ceiling fan. A cool breeze brushed over his exposed upper torso. There were many aspects of what was probably going to happen that he didn't like, but one thing was certain. He was eager to see and collaborate with Kiwi once more after their separation. Even though some of the guys she was racing with appeared to be really stupid, whatever. In the morning, he would take care of everything. Naruto had absolutely nothing to do when he woke up the following morning. That wasn't entirely accurate, though, because he had to pick up some eddies from a task he completed earlier this week. The gang in issue was going to have to throw some more money on the table because the situation had turned out to be far worse than described. Because, of course, he asked so politely. Certainly not after he had planted explosives throughout their small biker club with his Sandevistan and threatened to press a small red button once he had sped back up. They had so been quite kind and accepted his conditions. He would have the remainder of the day to himself if he just went and made the pickup. He would be occupied, unless the work Kiwi had invited him to was so essential that they would have to go immediately. Her small crew would just have to wait while he made the pickup. Like everyone else in Night City, he refused to give up his eddies. You would be viewed as a pushover if you simply gave up on the scratch that you required to get here. Which was unacceptable since he had a reputation, which helped him continue to operate without a fixer. The public was aware of his ability to deliver on his promises. The blonde entered his living room after finishing a basic breakfast consisting of a leftover burrito that he had set on the counter the previous day. He didn't have much time for basic things like decorating his apartment because he was a merc, but he had still managed to make it cozy. There were a number of posters over the couch, the majority of which were from the band Samurai. Kerry Uridine even signed a few of them. He knew he couldn't have Johnny Silverhand's autograph on them, as much as he would have loved to. On a bad night out without any weapons to protect himself, the man was more dead than a tiger claw by himself in Maelstrom area. With a sigh, he moved to the room's corner, grabbed a guitar, and sagged on the couch. He just chose the guitar that had looked the best because it wasn't anything spectacular, and he didn't have a trained eye for this kind of stuff. He had attempted to learn some of their songs, like any fan would. He had so far been successful in learning Chip In and Never Fade Away, which was his favorite song. As he picked up the plectrum and started to strum the strings, a faint smile crept onto his face. He tapped his foot on the floor, murmuring the lyrics to himself a little. He was doing his best to keep the beat. He was so engrossed in his own little pastime that he nearly missed the front door opening before he noticed someone standing in the hallway, staring directly at him. However, because his cyberware was connected to the security measure, he felt at ease enough to continue working after receiving a notification when the door opened and seeing who was on the video. He was just about to reach the song's greatest portion, after all. "Hey, Naruto Aluminum Finger, we're here." With a deadpan expression on his face, The blonde raised his head and suddenly stopped playing. What is that supposed to mean? He asked, obviously feeling not the least bit amused. The woman lit a cigarette, crossed her legs, and shrugged calmly before saying, Since you want to be Silverhand that badly. There were chairs next to the couch. He watched the rest of the crew come in by the time they were seated. Dorio, Pilar, Maine, and the most recent addition, David Martinez. Naruto looked at him curiously, knowing full well that the young man was the one wearing the Sandevistan. He was a little excited since he might be able to outbid him, depending on the model he had. Since he was still very young, he doubted the child understood anything about throwing hands or fighting properly, so he would have to learn it out someday. Most likely fortunate or unfortunate enough to join Maine's small group of outcasts. With a quiet groan, Naruto set down the guitar and looked over at the sound of someone searching through his belongings. He was about to ask Kiwi what was happening when a short girl came into the living room and sat down directly beside him, supporting what seemed to be an aluminum foil roll. In case you want to make it more authentic. After turning to face Kiwi, who appeared even more delighted, Naruto said, I already hate your crew. Maine sat down on the couch opposite him and growled, saying, Trust me, we're skeptical of you too. So, what can you do for us? Kiwi vouched, but I ain't one to accept something that seems too good to be true. Naruto laughed and said, Real ray of sunshine, aren't you? Not very trusting. The only person you can truly trust in this city is yourself, the man said with a shrug. With a raised eyebrow, Naruto said, Depressing life to live. In response, Maine said, It keeps you alive. Before this gets more sad and gloomy, I think you should answer your own question. What can I do for you? I need the details, or it's a no-go, the blonde said with a sigh as he sat back and crossed his legs. Maine stated, We'll get to that. First, I need to know more about you. What's your deal? No fixers, solo runner, you're a misfit in a city of misfits. That's not normal, boy. Maine appeared slightly impressed for the first time since his arrival. Shrugged. It's simple. Fixers make your life a living hell. I tried it before. They want a cut, and they get the credit. The only time you'll get anything resembling a proper thank you for your services is if you meet the client at the end of the gig. Otherwise, it amounts to nothing. And to get good jobs, you need to kiss the fixer's ass so deep you can taste what they had for breakfast. I'm not about that. I'd rather have it be my own work speaking. So you'd rather catch kids stealing lunch money, just to avoid fixers? Asked Dorio. If that's what I did, Naruto groaned, you wouldn't be here now. No, we're here now because Kiwi over there says you're good at what you do. And we need someone that doesn't need babysitting, and isn't afraid to get dirty on the job, Pilar said, circling the couch and unexpectedly swinging an arm over his shoulder. Naruto moved the man's arm away while rolling his eyes slowly. I'm not scared of a little blood if that's what you mean, he said. Good, 'cause we're already busy babysitting the rookie over here, announced Maine. What is that supposed to mean? I got shit done last time, didn't I? David shrugged at that. Rebecca was chuckling. Still need driving lessons. Blondie should have seen the wheels on that limo after you were done taking it for a joy ride. David said, I told you I didn't know how to drive. As his cheeks began to blush. A young woman who had been standing in the room's corner gave him a cunning glance before the conversation got out of hand, prompting Naruto to inquire, Anything wrong? You're equipped with a sandy, right? She asked, shaking her head. Naruto said in surprise, Well informed I see. as he glanced at Kiwi, who was merely puffing on her cigarette and dismissing it with a careless shrug. At that, she gave a nod. So, what can we expect of you? We ain't babysitting, need to know you can hold your own, Maine said, clearing his throat. I should be the one asking you that. You're working for that gonk Faraday, aren't you? Said Naruto, massaging his brow. Dorio asked. What's that supposed to mean? Naruto leaned forward and shrugged, saying, Gonk is just another suit, might not work there anymore, but he is no more of a threat than the so-called boogeyman. Atom Smasher? Asked David. Naruto laughed and said, Trust me on this one, Atom Smasher probably never fought anyone besides electricians and sheep herders. No real competition. Maine sighed, his brows narrowed beneath the sunglasses. You really are crazy, can't believe Kiwi would work with someone with such an ego. Meaning? Naruto asked him, his brow arched. If you're that ignorant, I'd bet even Martinez could smack you across the floor like a common Arasaka employee, said Maine, who leaned forward next, taking up the challenge. Naruto then smirked and asked, How much are you willing to bet? Maine simply glanced at David before nodding, feeling his blood start to boil. David smiled and turned on his chrome as though he had been waiting for the chance. The boy appeared to be traveling at the speed of light to everyone around him, but Naruto could only see that he was jogging. Narut, beaming from ear to ear, rose from his chair and advanced on David at even faster paces. The boy's expression of shock and surprise was so good that the blonde wished he had a camera. Naruto quickly grabbed the novice by the wrist and threw him over his shoulder and onto the floor. As the Sandavistans powered down, David fell onto his stomach and let out a grunt of pain as he felt his arm locked behind his back. He also moaned in even more agony at the blonde using him as a chair. Naruto sighed and placed his foot on the back of David's head once more. He's mentally getting ready to apologize later. If David hadn't looked so starstruck, that would have been his plan, at the very least. Did he just whip his ass and win a fan? No way. Easy now. We're just having a friendly chat, no? Naruto asked, shaking his head and turning his gaze away from David to gaze up at Maine's startled face. At least you know how to use it. The man quickly understood that the blonde might not be simply talking. Rebecca put her legs up on the table and said, That's what she said? All the other people looked at her, asking, Really? She simply shrugged it off. Anything else? Naruto sighed and shook his head. Maine said skeptically, How do you know Kiwi? Woman ain't too happy to talk, saying it's irrelevant, but I don't just get into bed with anyone. Naruto was scratching his head. That's all? I was on a job a couple of years back. I wasn't as used to Sandy and we ran into each other when we were both in a bad situation on a job that had apparently been double booked because of two fixers issuing the same job. Thought it was good enough to team up to get the job done, and while that wasn't funny enough, it happened 2 more times after that. Given that we apparently loved to run into each other, we decided to team up permanently. You separated though, expand on that. What happened? Maine asked, nodding. Naruto sighed. No clue. We were fine, having fun, all that jazz. Someday she wanted to go join a crew. I just always assumed she wanted to make a move for more eddies, perhaps get into the big leagues. Shit like that. Rebecca grinned and said, So you fucking. Kiwi genuinely seemed astonished for the first time, coughing briefly as she choked on her cigarette smoke. Shrugging, Naruto said, I guess. I don't see how that's important though. It isn't. Fine, you're on board, kid. You'll get a fair share of the reward, just like everyone else. That good with you? Maine said, smirking as he got to his feet. Ain't no problem, just let me know the details. As he explained the plan, the man nodded. All right, so this is the job. It had been around a week since the group from Maine had visited Naruto. Despite their somewhat rocky beginning, they had been able to communicate effectively after Maine had given them the rundown on their strategy and the task. His suggestions had been welcomed, and the big guy had even been able to acknowledge that he had missed some of the problems with the original plan he had devised. After that, they had spent many hours properly preparing, getting food, and overall just enjoying a few beers while talking about their plans. He had even been able to approach David rather closely. The boy was clearly enamored with meeting another Sandevistan user, so he gave him a contact for a qualified Ripper doctor who could rectify the shoddy work his regular Ripper did, and they swapped a number of advice. It's safe to say that the boy was really angry about the poor quality of the installment, but he later expressed gratitude to the blonde. However, one particular woman had remained after everyone else had left that night. Before the alcohol took effect, the two had not spoken to one another, and they essentially resumed their conversation where they had left off. In his sleeping quarters. Rebecca likely didn't know how precise it had been, but she was probably more than correct about how close they were. The blonde woman had stayed at the Uzumaki's house more than a few times, even after a week had gone by. And it was the same today. The powerful sound of the blonde man's hips clapping up on the woman's ass came from inside his bedroom. She was sitting on her hands and knees on the mattress with the blonde man behind her, and the noises reverberated off the walls as she moaned. The static had vanished because she had left her face mask on the dresser. His blonde hair clung slightly to his forehead from perspiration as the smell of sex filled the room as his hands gripped her cybernetically modified body's hips, and he quickly trusted his hips to bury his cock in her snatch from behind. Kiwi clenched her fingers around the blankets under her and swore. Shit! The smoothness of her skin made the man feel better than ever as he fucked her, and she closed her eyes as he felt his cock inside her. As he crashed into her, the man held on to her waist while her hips bucked up with his thrusts. As the man's hips bounced off her ass, the woman muttered, "God damn!" As he proceeded to fuck her, he felt the woman's insides tighten around his shaft as he buried himself deep into her. The woman tilted her head to the side and peered over her shoulder as he slammed his balls across her clit, prompting her to groan. As the man bent down and pressed his lips to the back of her neck, she groaned. "Fuck me harder." "Stressed out?" he asked, gasping for air as he reduced his speed and decided to give the woman a few of forceful thrusts at her request. With a moan, she put her head against his and said, "You got no idea?" According to the man's smile. "Oh, I think I do." That made Kiwi laugh softly, and as he gradually accelerated once more, the warmth of his tongue traced over the delicate skin of her neck. He withdrew and pressed closer, causing the woman to groan as he touched the deepest area of her pussy. She shuddered as the man plunged his cock in her, and she gasped. "Ah!" His cock glided in and out with every push as his hips kept bouncing off hers. He took hold of her waist, released her hips, and grasped her thighs, holding them wide. His hands squeezed hard around her legs as he fucked her, groaning as he hammered into her. "God damn! I'm getting there," the woman muttered as her stomach rolled. "Good." He exhaled as he rubbed the head of his cock against her entrance, and allowed it to sit there for a good second or two. Then he released her hips and rammed his hips forward, burying his cock deep within the lady. He had both hands on her hips, his hips bouncing against her ass. Kiwi gave a loud, "Ah!" shout. With a grunt, the man bent over and bit the woman's neck. He released his hold on her thighs and seized her hips once more, yanking back and smashing into her once again. He continued to screw her as quickly as he could while his hips smacked against her ass, causing her to groan loudly at the roughness. However, she could also sense that, like her, he was nearing release. As he went in and out of her, he slowed down and breathed heavily. "I'm gonna come soon," he muttered before pausing. The woman arched her back and nodded, her fingers firmly clutching the blankets beneath her. With his hands grasping her hips and pumping his dick into her, the man moaned as he plunged his cock into her. As he plunged into her, his thumb lightly rubbed the woman's clit. As he stroked her clit and smacked his hips into her ass, the woman whimpered, "Ugh!" With each pump, the man's hips jerked as he continued to pound into her, whispering, "Come now!" As her orgasm swept over her, the woman flung back her head and bit into the skin of her palm. Her legs shook as the orgasm gripped her, and she let out a cry of delight. The man moaned at the tightness of her pussy as he was forced over the brink, and she tightened around him. Letting go of her hips, he bent forward and gave her neck a gentle kiss and bite. As his climax struck, the man groaned, "God!" and gripped her more tightly as he entered her deeply. The woman let out a cry as she felt him explode deep within her, her inner walls tensing up against his cock. "Yeah," she said. With a shudder, the man sagged across her back. His arms encircled her as he lay on top of her, panting. Kiwi sighed. "That was good." Silently, the man said, "Yeah, I know. Amazing, in fact." She looked at him questioningly and said, "Go lay down, I'm not done yet." Slumping against the plush covers, Naruto complied despite raising an eyebrow at that. Without saying anything, Kiwi turned around and crawled up on top of him. She dropped down and lined his cock up with her entrance, her ass facing him. As she felt him expand her insides wide again, she let out a deep moan. She groaned as she lowered herself, and felt him slip deeply within her. The woman gasped. "Ah!" as she started to ride him after feeling his length split her out even more than before. As she jumped on top of him, riding his cock, Kiwi moaned and ran her fingers through her hair. As he watched her ride him, the man's eyes glazed over and he bit his lip. "Holy shit!" murmured Naruto. As her ass rippled from the repeated force of her dropping down on his crotch, his eyes were almost fixed on it. As she rode him, Kiwi turned to face him and asked, "Like what you see?" with a tiny smile on her lips. The man put his arms around her waist and pulled her down more forcefully onto his lap, saying, "Do you even have to ask?" Kiwi growled out, "Oh yeah. That feels so good." She raised her hips, her insides getting slippery from her own excitement, and the man hummed, "MMHM." The woman quickly reached her peak, climaxing with a cry as her inner walls clamped down around his cock and she thrust hard. "Ah! Fuck! Ah!" exclaimed the woman. With his own climax hammering him like a truck, the man moaned as he immediately followed her. As he shot load after load within her, he bucked his hips and slammed into her. Holding onto her hips as he approached, he made sure that none of his sperm missed the spot. The woman fell into him, gasping for air as she regained her breath. A few minutes later, she looked up and swore. The woman's face was not amused as she reached down to grab the covers and lifted them up to cover herself, realizing that they weren't really alone. She didn't particularly want to perform live porn for their entertainment, even though they had most likely already seen everything. You got to be kidding. What's wrong? Naruto asked, raising his head and panting quietly. As she fell off him, Kiwi rolled her eyes and said, We got a guest. Naruto sat up and asked, What do you mean with guests? And as soon as he did, he saw the bedroom door open and David Martinez's almost appalled face. After staring at them for a moment without saying anything, the boy blinked silently. The two Sandevistan users simply stared at one another without saying anything. After a while, Naruto decided it was time to start a conversation before things became any more awkward. The query was, Time for the job? Naruto asked. David just nodded his head, excused himself, and let them be alone. With a chuckle, Kiwi said, You didn't know the door opened? Naruto sighed. I was a bit too occupied with something else to care about a notification. The woman jumped from the bed and gave a little laugh. Get dressed, Main gets pissy when he is forced to wait, she said, throwing a shirt at him as the remnants of their recent actions trickled down her inner thighs. As the two started to dress, Naruto simply sighed and grabbed the shirt, pulling it over his head. Approximately 20 minutes was all that was needed for the two to freshen up following their activities. Wearing a red shirt and a basic pair of slacks, Naruto strolled down the stairs while stroking his damp blonde hair. I took a moment to stretch, feeling very rejuvenated. The two of them needed to catch up because they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Furthermore, the woman was far more irrational in bed than most people would imagine. He didn't mind. In fact, he found it enjoyable. It was made more enjoyable by the fact that few people could equal his level of intensity. He made himself a fast cup of coffee as the blonde entered the living room area and looked at David, who was simply leaning against the wall. Something like a little flustered expression filled his face as his foot tapped quickly against the floor. Coffee? Asked Naruto. Shrugging, the boy said, Sure. Naruto nodded quickly before pouring the boy a cup and guiding it down the table. So, you and Kiwi, huh? David asked, taking a small sip as he sat down at the counter with a faint sigh. After being silent for a minute, Naruto sipped his coffee. Yeah, I just love how that woman smiles. As David took another sip, there was a pause during which he simply sat and considered the situation. He turned his head to see Naruto's amused smile, and that's when it hit him. Wait. What? It's safe to say that the blonde snapped right away.